Let's kickstart the top conversation that we have in store for you on the Money Show then, and that relates to thematic ETFs, to speak about not just this potential wealth bringer that could generate wealth over a period of time for you. I also want to talk about the healthcare space and a specific product that is being launched by ICICI Prudential AMC. Joining me to speak about it is Chintan Haria, the Head Products and Strategy at ICICI Prudential AMC. Chintan, thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time. I want to start by asking about thematic ETFs and how they fit in to the overarching conversation that is to do with passives as they should be a part of your portfolio.
So if you look at it, the evolution of investing, we had active investing funds, then there were index funds, then ETFs, which were based on broad market indices, mainly market capitalization based indices. Then we saw, at least in the West, dividend yield becoming a very big theme. It's not such a big theme in India. And a lot of options within smart beta and thematics and sectoral, which can potentially fit an investor's passive investing needs. And with that thought process in mind, we are curating a portfolio or a bouquet of ETFs within the sectoral and thematic ETFs, which can fit in from an investor's long-term requirements. And we feel that this adds up to the options available to the investors when they are looking at sectoral and thematic investing in the markets.
I want to come back to you on these thematic ETFs now, because the easiest way that one would understand an ETF would be to look at, say, the benchmark index and to say that you have a Sensex ETF or a Nifty ETF, which would essentially help you on an ongoing basis to invest in the 50 stocks of the Nifty. What are the rules that govern a thematic ETF and how is it constructed?
So as far as the rules of a thematic ETF are concerned or a sectoral ETF are concerned, the regulator did come out with the rules, I think about a year and a half back, wherein it says they've taken care of the concentration risk, they've taken care of the top 3 risks. So top 3 stocks put together cannot be more than 65% of the ETF. Any stock cannot be more than 35%. So with these constraints in mind, the sectoral ETFs or the sectoral indices are formed or constructed by the index providers. And then we are launching the sectoral ETFs based on these constraints, which are basically managed or maintained by the index providers. So I think from a investor standpoint, these checks and balances are in place. And if they look at any sector or a theme, typically there may be some sectors in which a few stocks dominate. But within that, because of this cap of per stock 35% and top 3 stocks not forming more than 65% plus minimum 10 stocks in the index. These are the broad rules that are there. I think this provides from a sector perspective enough diversification while taking care of the concentration for risk for the investor.
Now, Chintan, you've got a new fund offer that is currently open. It opened on the 6th of May and it closes on the 14th of May. And this is incidentally a healthcare ETF. I did want to talk about the sector and also specifically about this product that you're launching. Why, according to you, is healthcare the space to be? And the reason I ask is that if you look at several of the constituents of a healthcare index, or what you would normally put in a healthcare index, you've seen quite a few of these names rallying since the pandemic broke out last year. So to a large extent, maybe there's also concern that they've had their run and they will consolidate at this point.
Fair enough. So I think that takes me back to the basics of investing. Whenever an investor is investing, the assumption is that the investor is investing with a long-term investment in your long-term allocation. If someone is investing for the shorter term or to trade, that's a different approach, and that requires a lot of insights and a lot of effort on the part of the individual. And even after that, the success may or may not be there. But if an investor does make a long-term allocation into a well-thought-out strategy of asset allocation with portfolio diversification, with a mix of active and passive, with a mix of sectoral, thematic, as well as a different large cap, mid cap, small cap funds, I think it is an approach which in the long run will help the investor. So first, the investor should decide whether they want to be X percentage in equity and Y percentage in debt. That's the first rule. After that is determined based on the responsibilities, based on the earning power, based on the near-term goals that the investor has, as well as the long-term goals. then the selection of underlying products comes in handy. And you mentioned about the healthcare ETF in specific and some of the stocks doing well in the last 1 year. I think if we go back in history for the last 3 decades, I think along with the information technology industry, the Indian healthcare pharmaceutical industry is the second largest exporter, in terms of one of the largest exporters as well. And the domestic market is also growing well. And many of our companies are world leading companies in terms of exports. So if I look at the ecosystem for the pharmaceutical sector, we are at a strong footing. Yes, since March 2020, when the COVID breakout happened, the index has done well, the stocks have done well. But if I go back the previous 5 years, between 2010 and 2015, the sector had done well. 2016 to 19, this sector had actually underperformed the markets in a very big manner. So whenever an investor is allocating, they should not look at a yearly move, but allocate with the long-term view. And whenever there is a correction, if you add to it, it is even better in terms of your long-term wealth creation. As far as the product is concerned, as far as the healthcare index is concerned, you're getting 20 stocks, which are one of the largest in the pharmaceutical and hospital space, a 20 stock portfolio. And if we look at India, you mentioned about many of them hitting new highs. Of course, at different points of time, there can be cycles in the market. But today, if you look at it, we've been shown out in terms of the serious lack of medical facilities in India. The availability of medicines is becoming a challenge thanks to the pandemic. And so more and more government effort in terms of spending on medical infrastructure is happening. The private sector also capex is happening in medical infrastructure, which should help this sector, at least from a demand perspective. Also, we must remember that India, with a 50 crore potential middle class by 2030, will also be demanding domestically a lot more medicine. So if we think from a medical inflation point of view, from a cost of medicine point of view, also that is also rising. So any investor, if you look at yourself and, in terms of the spending that we are doing on medicines, it is increasing year by year. So hedge your overall portfolio against this medical inflation. It may be fruitful to allocate some amount of money to the healthcare sector. And if whenever there is an opportunity and the markets do provide a lower entry point or a lower price to average it, you should take advantage of that as well. But it is a fact that with the growing investments, growing demand and growing population, with more affordability, with insurance penetration, also helping the affordability from a wider market perspective, we believe that healthcare as a sector has a good 10, 20, 30-year future. So the allocation should be with the longest tenure in mind from an investor perspective.
Absolutely, and you've summed it up perfectly. In fact, you've talked about the use case, you've talked about the sector, but I do want to ask about ETFs here in India. They're yet to get the kind of momentum, shall we say, that they have in a market like, for example, the United States, where you have passive funds as a whole that now outnumber or rather outweigh actively managed funds. So having said that, from the perspective of an investor, is there a risk in terms of liquidation of that asset in that counterparty? How is that going to be taken care of by the AMC?
Sure. So I think if you look at it, this is in fact, you mentioned about passive funds globally. I think I read an article today that passive funds increased by, I think the passive AUM has increased to $15 trillion as we speak, which is the highest ever on the back of flows. So clearly in US, that trend has happened and people are moving towards passive. In India also, as more and more investors are getting aware, as more and more advisors are getting aware, they are allocating a certain part of the investors' portfolio towards passive. And that since 2015-16, we are seeing an increasing interest in terms of allocation towards ETFs. And we believe that may continue in India as well. As you are aware, as such, in India, the financialization has only started in the last 5-6 years. We were a predominantly hard assets or physical assets investing country because of the higher inflation that we used to have. But since in the last 5-6 years, inflation is pretty much in control and financial assets are being looked at as an investment destination by investors, more and more investors flocking towards insurance, mutual funds, even direct investing is getting bigger. We believe that the space for ETFs is going to grow much like what has happened in the West. And the pace of growth will also be fast, is what we believe in, because the adoption of digital technology, the adoption of by the younger generation of applications or apps on the mobile phone has meant that the access to ETF, the access to investing has also become that much easy. So I think the combination of awareness, the combination of increased digital penetration, and the fact that young investors are looking at longer term avenues for investment in equity at a time when interest rates are very low is making it a good platform for equity ETFs to actually grow as we move along in the next few years in India.
All right, Chintan, as always, pleasure speaking with you. Wish you all the best for what you have on offer.